starting out with the basics of philosophy. Now, when we first get into philosophy, there's three main branches. There's epistemology, metaphysics, and then ethics. It's my best advice to start off with epistemology because this covers what we know and how we know it and the justification of what we define knowledge as. And now, in epistemology, there's two main types of reasonings. There is called empirical reasoning and rational reasoning. And now the distinction between these two is that empirical relies on our perceptions. Once we get deeper in epistemology, we'll get to question those, but let's start off surface level. So, an example of an empirical fact is, I observed it raining outside, therefore I know it's raining. I use my sight to come to a conclusion. Right, this is an empirical justification. Now this is very strong evidence for certain propositions. Learning what type of proposition requires what type of justification can help you if you ever are interested in debating or just understanding how propositions can be evaluated. The other type of justification is called a rational justification. Now this is quite different because an example of a rational justification would be the fact that all bachelors are not married. And now I don't need to interview every single bachelor in the world to know this to be true. I can just know it by definition of what a bachelor is. This is a tautology, something that is true by definition. And now understanding the distinction between these two can help it because let's say there is a claim, and this claim requires an empirical justification to be justified, and they give a rational one. Now this could be an inconsistent or insufficient way to justify this claim. And since it's insufficient, the claim is unsatisfied, so it's not proved. And now, once we get deeper in epistemology, we can go on to things like Solipsism, which is basically the questioning of our perceptions. And what do we know is actually true? And now, having a foundation in epistemology is greatly beneficial because it can teach you how to argue propositions better and understand how to justify them better. And now there's three actually main branches in epistemology. Well, not three, there's more than three, but the three common ones that I know is Foundationalism, Coherentism, and Infinitism. Now what these three positions describe is basically what is knowledge and where does it come from. So foundationalism says that knowledge is basically things that are justified based off of our foundational beliefs. And these foundational beliefs could be the validity of our sense perceptions, the coherence of the laws of logic, etc., etc. Infinitism is basically that my knowledge is justified by something else I already knew, which is justified that something else that I already knew, which is justified by something else I already knew, which is justified by another fact, by another fact, by another fact, and it keeps going on to an infinite regression. Coherentism is quite complicated. I could make a video entirely dedicated to coherentism, which is basically that my knowledge can only be something that's true, or I can only know something if it's coherent with everything else. So as in, if something is contradictory, or is a contradiction in a set, then I can never know it to be true. So it's quite complicated. As long as it coheres with the set of reality, then I can know it to be true. So that's my rough definition of coherentism. I'll have links to explanations and articles explaining every single thing I talk about in this video, so if anybody's interested, go ahead and look in the description. And the next thing we're moving on to would be metaphysics. Now, metaphysics is most likely the most complicated because it includes modality, ontology, dualism, epiphenomenalism, dualism, like all of this like plethora of other stuff. But the main focus of metaphysics is basically beyond physics. It's by the word metaphysics. And so, in a way everyone can understand, I guess, you would need to learn your foundational positions on these topics, as in what do you believe in, right? I can't really convince you of any positions, but there's positions like dualism that you think the mind, or whatever you think consciousness is something that's abstractly non-physical and interacts with physical things like your body. Or you can be a neuroscientific reductionist and believe that consciousness is something that is reducible to physical processes in your brain. You can be a materialist and believe that no non-physical things exist, only the physical exists. You can be a physicalist and think that physical things are what is necessary and non-physical things contingent upon this physicality. There's a lot of positions which question what does it mean to be existent, right? What are the standards of existence? And there's also questions of modality, as in necessity, possibility, and impossibility. When we get into logic, we get into possible world semantics, and I've talked about possible worlds in a lot of my debate videos. If, like, everyone has heard me say something about possible worlds. So, what is a possible world, actually? Like, what does that even mean? Well, a possible world is basically something that's hypothetically true. As in, it could logically occur, but didn't happen in our actual world. And now, what's an example of this? Well, let's say one day I have red shoes on, but at home I had blue shoes. So, hypothetically, I could have worn my blue shoes outside instead of my red ones. So in some possible world 1, I'm wearing blue shoes, or whatever color I said. And now this is an abstraction from that world can be made into a new possible world, so there's an infinite amount of possible worlds. And now, things that are necessary are things that exist, or are true in all possible worlds, every single one of them. Things that are contingent are things that are only in some possible worlds. Recently, which I've had this position for a long time, but this is the most well thought of what I thought of this position. I think the applicability of mathematics is a necessary fact, as in, is true in every possible world. I think logic is true in every possible world. I think a lot of things. Well, I'm not a necessitarian by any means. I think it's an unjustifiable position, so people will stop DMing me about me being a necessitarian. But aside from that, another question I get is, how can you justify something as a necessary fact? How can I prove something exists in every single possible world? It's quite simple. Basically, you have to demonstrate the contrapositive as impossible. So what this means is, what's the contradiction to a position? So, let's say, what's the contradiction to me existing? Me not existing. Now, if I were to demonstrate me not existing as impossible, that means I must exist, and I can never not exist, right? So if me not existing is logically impossible, then in all possible worlds, I must exist. It's very simple to demonstrate necessary truths. This is how you demonstrate logic as a necessary truth. This is how you demonstrate the applicability of mathematics as a necessary truth. To my knowledge, this is the only way to demonstrate something as a necessary fact, so yeah. Now, saving time for the last subject, or the last branch of philosophy, not really the last one, but like the last big one, is ethics. Now, ethics and morality is a very simple but yet complicated field. It's the main topic in ethics, is meta-ethics, is what is morality and how can we determine what is right and wrong? By what standard can we determine what is right and wrong? And each meta-ethical position tries to give a standard in order to differentiate the two. So let's say divine command theory. Their standard is what God says. I think that's retarded, mainly because I'm an atheist, and also because if you say morality is objective, but then say it's because what God says, then it's entirely arbitrary, so subjective to God saying it. Okay, whatever. Let's get away from that. But then there's secular humanism, which says morality is based off of consequences. If the consequence of an action has more suffering than it does positive well-being, then this action is immoral, it's wrong. But if the action has more well-being than it does suffering, then the action is positive and correct. And understanding a foundation in meta-ethics will make debating moral philosophy extremely less semantical and a lot easier, because you'll be able to justify your position because you're already grounded in a set standard. I see a lot of debaters who go around debating.